Chapter 1. The Library in the Woods. The town of Redwood Falls didn't look like a place where magic could hide. From the outside, it was as ordinary as any small town tucked away in Oregon, 2 diners on Main Street, a movie theater that hadn't changed its marquee letters in 3 years, and houses lined up with mailboxes that leaned like tired soldiers. But if you followed the cracked road that wound past the high school and the baseball field, you'd eventually find yourself at the edge of the forest. And there, half swallowed by pine trees older than the town itself, stood a library that most people had already forgotten. The Redwood Falls Public Library looked less like a library and more like a relic of another time. Its walls were stone, veined with moss, and the roof sagged under the weight of 100 autumns. Windows, some cracked, some fogged, watched the forest with blind eyes. To most people, it was a creepy building, one they passed quickly if they ever had to. But to Eli Carter, it was the one place in town that felt like home. Eli wasn't exactly popular at Redwood High. At 15, he was the kind of kid people barely noticed. Too quiet to be the class clown, too distracted to be the athlete, too strange to be the kid everyone admired. He liked to draw. Not superheroes or cars like most of the guys in his grade, but creatures. Birds with wings made of fire. Wolves with eyes like lanterns. Trees that could move. His notebooks were filled with sketches that looked like dreams no one else had seen. And maybe that's why the library called to him. Its silence was the kind of silence that seemed to whisper. The smell of old paper and dust was like comfort. And the librarian, Professor Thorne, never shooed him away. If anything, the professor seemed to expect him. That October afternoon, the air was sharp with cold, and the trees burned gold and orange. Eli pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the library and stepped inside. The place was dimly lit, the lamps casting pools of warm light across rows of ancient books. The air carried that familiar, earthy smell of paper, ink, and something else he could never place, something metallic, like old coins warmed by the sun. "Back again, Mr. Carter?" Professor Thorne's voice drifted from behind the front desk. The professor looked like he belonged more to the building than the books did. His beard was silver, his eyebrows fierce and thick, and his eyes sharp in a way that made Eli feel both exposed and protected. Nobody knew how old he was or even if professor was a real title. Some kids in town whispered he used to be a magician. Others said he was just a lonely old man. "I was just looking for something new," Eli said, setting his backpack down. Thorne gave him a curious smile. A boy who fills entire sketchbooks with imaginary beasts, and still he says he's looking for something new. Interesting. Eli flushed. The professor had seen his drawings once, when Eli had left a notebook behind. He still remembered the way Thorne had studied them with an expression that wasn't mockery, but something else, recognition, maybe. The professor shuffled around the desk, moving with a surprising energy for his age. "Come with me," he said, and began walking toward the spiral staircase at the far end of the library. Eli hesitated. The upper floors weren't usually open. Dusty ropes and little wooden signs marked them archives, staff only. But Thorne didn't look back, so Eli followed. The second floor was darker, the windows mostly shuttered. Shelves rose like pillars, crammed with leather-bound volumes. Some titles weren't even in English. The air felt thicker here, like every breath carried a weight of history. Thorne stopped at a narrow door tucked into the farthest corner. It was small, so small that Eli would have missed it if he hadn't been following right behind. The professor pulled a key from around his neck, a bronze key so old it looked half-melted. He fitted into the lock. The door groaned open. Inside was a cramped room, almost like an attic. Books and artifacts cluttered every surface, globes with unfamiliar consonants, jars with pressed herbs, and scrolls tied with faded ribbon. But in the middle, on a pedestal draped with red cloth, lay something that seemed to hum with its own light. It was a key. Not like the professor's, but larger, heavier looking. Its bronze surface glowed faintly, as though embers smoldered within the metal. Eli's heart stuttered. He didn't know why, but looking at it felt like remembering something he had never known. What is it? He asked softly. Professor Thorne studied him carefully. That, Mr. Carter, is the Ember Key. And I believe it has been waiting for you. Eli blinked. For me? Thorne's eyes were unreadable. You draw what others cannot see. That is not an accident. The world hides more than it shows, and sometimes it chooses who gets to find the cracks in its armor. Eli shook his head, trying to laugh. You make it sound like magic is real. Isn't it? Thorne said, tilting his head. Every story you've ever read, every picture you've sketched, where do you think such things come from? Imagination, yes. But imagination is just the door. The key, his gaze shifted to the glowing bronze on the pedestal, is what opens it. Eli felt the pull of it, strong and undeniable. His fingers twitched. He wanted to touch it, though every part of his brain screamed not to. And that was when a voice behind him broke the spell. Figures. Leave it to Eli Carter to sneak off into the creepiest part of town with the creepiest old man. He spun. Harper Vale stood in the doorway, her hands on her hips. Her brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and she wore her soccer hoodie, mud still spattered on the sleeves. She was his neighbor, his classmate, and, though she'd never admit it, sometimes his only friend. What are you doing here? Eli asked. Looking for you. Your mom said you'd be here. Harper stepped inside, squinting at the glowing pedestal. Okay, what is that? It looks like a movie prop. Professor Thorne's expression darkened, though only slightly. Miss Vale. Curious as ever. Harper ignored him and moved closer. Seriously, Eli. That thing looks like it's about to burst into flames. Don't touch it. But it was too late. Eli's hand had already brushed the metal. The instant his fingers touched it, heat flared, not painful, but alive, like gripping a heartbeat. The key pulsed once, twice, and then the world split open. The air shimmered, the walls around them wavered, and a crack of light tore across the far wall. It widened into a doorway, revealing not the dusty shelves of the library, but a forest glowing with emerald leaves, silver rivers, and skies so wide they looked endless. The Ember Key burned in Eli's palm, and he realized he couldn't let go. Harper's mouth fell open. Eli, what did you just do? Eli didn't have an answer. But he knew one thing. Nothing about his life was going to stay ordinary anymore. Chapter 2. The Forest Beyond the Door. The doorway shimmered like water, its edges glowing faintly as though the library itself were burning at the seams. Eli's heart hammered in his chest. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He clutched the Ember Key, its warmth radiating into his hand, and knew without explanation that it was the reason this impossible door now yawned open before them. On the other side was not Redwood Falls. Not the library, not Oregon, not anything he recognized. The air beyond glowed with a strange green light, as if sunlight had passed through a prism and scattered across the forest floor. Trees rose like towers, their trunks silver gray, their leaves glistening like emeralds wet with rain. A breeze carried scents Eli couldn't name, something sweet, sharp, and ancient, all at once. Harper was the first to break the silence. Nope. Absolutely not. Whatever this is, we're not going in. Her voice was steady, but Eli saw the way her hands gripped her hoodie sleeves, as though to keep herself from shaking. Professor Thorne, however, looked almost satisfied. He folded his hands behind his back, studying the glowing threshold as if he'd been waiting for it his entire life. The Ember Key has chosen, he murmured. The door opens only for its bearer. Beyond lies the world where the stories you've both half believed take their roots. That's insane, Harper snapped. You can't just, what is this, Narnia 2.0? Eli, put the thing down. I can't, Eli said quietly. He held up his hand, showing how the bronze key clung to his palm as if magnetized. He tried prying it off with his other hand, but it wouldn't budge. It's stuck. Thorne gave a small nod. Because it belongs to you now, whether you wish it or not. The glow pulsed brighter, and a sudden gust of wind rushed through the library. Loose papers lifted from the shelves, spiraling into the air like startled birds. The force pushed against Eli's chest, tugging him forward. Harper grabbed his sleeve. "Eli, don't." But the pull was too strong. The door wasn't asking anymore, it was demanding. Eli stumbled, and Harper, refusing to let go, was dragged with him. Together, they fell through the shimmering doorway. The first thing Eli noticed was the air. It was richer than anything he'd ever breathed, cool and sharp with the bite of pine, yet somehow sweet, like the taste of honey. His lungs expanded as though they'd never known real oxygen until now. He landed hard on moss that glowed faintly underfoot. Harper landed beside him with a yelp, mud streaking her hoodie. She scrambled up, eyes wide as she spun in a circle. "Where are we?" she whispered. Eli rose slowly, staring at the forest around them. The trees weren't just tall, they were colossal, stretching so high that their crowns disappeared into a misty canopy. Leaves whispered like voices. Strange flowers bloomed in the undergrowth, their petals giving off soft light, as though the forest itself was alive with quiet fireflies. "It's beautiful," Eli breathed. "It's dangerous," Harper corrected, brushing dirt off her jeans. "I mean, look at this place. This isn't normal. And you just dragged us into it." Eli was about to respond when something moved in the shadows. A figure darted between the trees, quick and low. Then another. Leaves rustled. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Harper grabbed Eli's arm. "Tell me that was a squirrel." It wasn't. From the brush-stepped creatures Eli had only ever drawn in the margins of his notebooks. They stood on 4 legs, shaped like wolves, but their bodies were made of mist and their eyes burned with soft blue light. Their forms flickered, like smoke struggling to stay solid. 3 of them circled closer, silent, predatory. Eli's heart pounded. He remembered every line of his sketches, how he'd once drawn wolves made of smoke and stars. They were real. They were here. The largest of the creatures lowered its head, growling, a sound like wind howling through a cave. "Eli," Harper hissed, "do something." "What do you expect me to do?" he whispered back, frozen in awe and terror. Before the wolves could lunge, the key in Eli's hand flared. The glow spread outward, spilling like firelight across the clearing. The wolves halted. Their forms wavered, as if caught in a breeze. Then, one by one, they bowed their heads. Eli blinked. "They're not attacking." "They're worshipping you," Harper muttered. Her voice was laced with disbelief and maybe a touch of fear. The wolves backed away, dissolving into mist that drifted up toward the canopy and vanished. The clearing was silent again, except for Eli's pounding heartbeat. Harper stepped back from him, her expression sharp. "Okay, you need to explain. Right now. Because this," she pointed to his hand, still blazing with ember light, "is not normal. Why would those things bow to you?" "I don't know," Eli admitted. But deep inside, he felt a strange certainty, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. The sketches, the dreams, the feeling of not belonging in his own world. Maybe he wasn't supposed to. Maybe this was the world that had been whispering to him all along. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Seeker." Both Eli and Harper spun. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure cloaked in green, their face hidden beneath a hood. They carried a staff topped with a crystal that glowed faintly in rhythm with the Ember Key. "You have arrived," the figure said, their voice low and resonant. "The Ember Key has awakened, and the Seeker stands among us once more." Harper frowned. "Seeker? No, you've got the wrong kid. He's just Eli. He can barely pass math." But Eli couldn't speak. The stranger's words lodged in his chest like truth he'd been waiting his whole life to hear. The hooded figure stepped forward, lowering their staff slightly in greeting. "Welcome to the Evershade Forest, Seeker. Your journey has only just begun." Chapter 3: The Seeker's Burden. The hooded figure moved gracefully, their boots barely disturbing the moss as they entered the clearing. Up close, Eli could see their cloak was woven with threads that shimmered faintly, catching the strange green light of the forest. The staff they carried pulsed in time with the Ember Key in his hand, as if the two objects recognized each other. Harper immediately stepped in front of Eli, squaring her shoulders like she was about to defend him in a soccer match. "All right, mysterious forest person," she said, her voice sharper than her courage. "Explain. Who are you? And why are you calling him Seeker like this is some kind of video game quest?" The figure lowered their hood. Beneath it was a woman with copper-brown skin and eyes so pale they seemed almost silver. Her hair fell in loose braids streaked with green, as though strands of moss had taken root there. She looked both young and ancient at once. "My name is Lyra," she said. Her voice was low but carried an authority that made the forest itself seem to listen. "I am a warden of the Evershade. I have waited long for the Seeker to arrive." Harper glanced back at Eli, exasperated. "She's looking at you. Do something." Eli's mouth felt dry. I think you've got the wrong person. I'm not, whatever you think I am. I'm just a kid. I live in Redwood Falls. I draw things in notebooks. That's it." Lyra's silver eyes softened, but her tone didn't waver. "The Ember Key does not choose by accident. It responds only to those who can bridge worlds, the ones who can see beyond what is, into what could be. You carry that sight within you. You always have." Eli shifted uncomfortably. Her words echoed thoughts he'd never said aloud, the quiet conviction that the world he lived in wasn't all there was, that the creatures he sketched weren't entirely make-believe. Harper, however, wasn't convinced. "Hold on. Let's pretend for a second that all of this is real and not some elaborate prank. What exactly does being the Seeker mean? Is there, like, a training manual? A how-to guide? Or are you just dumping a bunch of mystical destiny nonsense on a kid who didn't even ask for it?" Lyra's gaze flicked to Harper, calm but piercing. "The Seeker is the bearer of the Ember Key, the one who can awaken the Heartfire and restore balance. For centuries, the Evershade has stood as the barrier between your world and the Ashborn." Eli's pulse quickened. "The Ashborn?" At the name, the forest seemed to darken, the light dimming as though clouds had crossed the sun. Even the air grew colder. Lyra's voice dropped lower. "They are shadows given form. Once, they were banished beyond the veil, but their hunger has never faded. They seek to consume, to hollow out both our world and yours until nothing remains but ash. Already, their whispers creep back into the roots of the Evershade. If they break through fully, not even your world will be safe." Eli swallowed hard. The word Ashborn curled in his mind like smoke, heavy and suffocating. "So you're saying," Harper cut in, "that my neighbor, who, by the way, still owes me $20 for mowing his lawn last summer, is supposed to fight a bunch of shadow monsters and save two worlds?" "That is the burden of the Seeker," Lyra said simply. Harper threw up her hands. "Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. We fall through a glowing door, almost get eaten by ghost wolves, and now Eli's apparently some chosen hero. This day just keeps getting better." Eli almost laughed, but the knot in his stomach was too tight. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a kid who still got nervous speaking in front of class. He looked down at the Ember Key, still glowing in his palm, and wondered what it had seen in him that he couldn't see in himself. Lyra stepped closer, lowering her staff. "The Ember Key binds itself only to the one who can wield it. You cannot refuse its call. But you may choose how to answer it. Courage is not the absence of fear, Seeker, it is action in spite of it." The words struck Eli in a way he couldn't explain, like a spark catching kindling. Harper sighed, pulling at her hoodie's strings. "Okay, let's say we go along with this prophecy thing. What happens now? Do we just hang out in this forest until shadow creatures show up to kill us?" Lyra's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Not quite. There are others who must meet the Seeker. Allies who will help him understand his purpose. The road ahead will test you both in ways you cannot yet imagine." But first, she turned toward the trees, her silver eyes narrowing. "We must leave this place. We are not alone." A rustling sound rose from the forest, low and steady, like dry leaves scraping across stone. Eli turned, his chest tightening. Between the trees, shapes moved, shadows darker than the rest of the forest, sliding forward on silent feet. The Ashbourne. Harper's breath hitched. Is this the part where we run? Yes, Lyra said calmly. She raised her staff, the crystal blazing bright. Run and do not look back. Eli tightened his grip on the Ember Key as they bolted into the glowing forest, the shadows creeping ever closer behind. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Trees. The forest erupted around them. Eli sprinted after Lyra, the Ember Key blazing like a torch in his hand. Harper ran beside him, her sneakers slapping against the mossy ground, her breath sharp and ragged. Behind them, the Ashbourne gave chase, not with the pounding rhythm of wolves, but with a whispering slither, like smoke sliding across stone. The sound crawled up Eli's spine, colder than winter air. Don't look back, Lyra commanded. Her cloak streamed behind her as she darted between the massive silver trunks. She moved swiftly, as though she knew every root and stone. Their gaze feeds on fear. Of course, that made Eli want to look. His curiosity gnawed at him until he risked a glance over his shoulder. The shadows were closer than he thought. They weren't solid, not fully. They writhed like ink in water, their edges fraying and reforming, but their faces were the worst. Hollow masks, pale and cracked, with eyes like black holes that pulled at him, made him stumble. His chest tightened, his legs almost locking in place. Eli. Harper's voice snapped through the fog. She yanked his arm, forcing him forward. Focus. Don't give them the satisfaction. He gasped and tore his gaze away, but the cold stayed lodged in his bones. Branches clawed at them as they ran, snagging Harper's hoodie, tangling Eli's hair. The forest wasn't just massive, it was alive, shifting. Trees leaned inward, their branches weaving together overhead, and for a moment, Eli felt as though the ever-shade itself was trying to shield them. But the Ashbourne slid effortlessly through the gaps, unbothered by the obstacles. Lyra, where are we going? Harper shouted. To the river. Lyra called back. The Ashbourne cannot cross flowing water. It breaks their form. Eli's lungs burned, but he forced himself onward, clutching the Ember Key tighter. Its glow had grown fiercer, pulsing in rhythm with his racing heart. He didn't understand how, but he felt it urging him, like it wanted to be used, not just carried. A hiss tore through the clearing ahead. One of the Ashbourne peeled away from the shadows and lunged, its form stretching impossibly long, arms clawing toward Eli. Down, Lyra barked. Eli dropped instinctively. The creature's claw missed his face by inches, slicing a deep groove into the tree trunk beside him. The wood sizzled, blackened, as if burned by frost. Before he could scramble back up, the Ashbourne loomed over him, its mask twisting, its hollow eyes boring into his. His body froze, terror rooting him to the ground. The Ember Key flared. Heat surged into his arm, burning away the ice in his veins. Without thinking, Eli thrust the key forward. A burst of light erupted. Not fire exactly, but something brighter, like embers fanned into a storm. The Ashbourne screeched, its shadowy body unraveling into wisps of smoke before dissolving completely. The mask cracked in two, falling to the moss with a sound like shattering porcelain. Eli gasped, staring at the smoking remains. He'd done that. Somehow, the key had answered him. Harper grabbed his arm, hauling him up. Congratulations, hero, you roasted a shadow monster. Now keep moving before his friends catch up. They stumbled back into stride, Lyra guiding them unerringly through the forest. The sounds of pursuit didn't lessen, more Ashbourne hissed and whispered from behind, their shadows flickering against the glowing moss. Finally, the thunder of rushing water reached Eli's ears. The trees parted to reveal a wide river, its surface glowing faintly silver under the strange green light of the canopy. The current surged fast, white foam cresting where the water struck hidden rocks. Lyra raised her staff, the crystal blazing as bright as the key. Across, she ordered. Now. Harper hesitated at the bank. Are you insane? That's a death trap. We'll drown before we hit the other side. Better drown than hollowed, Lyra said sharply. She waded into the current without hesitation, her cloak whipping around her legs. The Ashborn closed in at the tree-line, their whispering voices rising like a chorus of knives scraping stone. Eli's chest seized. He didn't have time to think. He shoved the key into his pocket, grabbed Harper's hand, and together they plunged into the freezing water. The river swallowed them instantly. The current dragged at his legs, pulling him under, but Eli kicked hard, thrashing upward until his head broke the surface. The water was ice, biting at his skin, but it felt alive, clean, as though it carried the strength of the forest itself. Keep moving. Harper gasped beside him, fighting against the pull. Eli struck out with his arms, the Ember Key's glow flickering faintly beneath the water like a guiding flame. Lyra was already halfway across, staff raised high as though the river itself obeyed her command. On the far bank, Eli dared another look back. The Ashborn lined the opposite shore, but none stepped into the water. They hissed and writhed, their forms shuddering, unable to cross. Their hollow eyes followed him, full of hunger and promise. One of them reached the edge and extended a claw. The water hissed where the shadow touched, steam rising, but the current surged stronger, shoving it back. Eli's chest ached as he forced himself forward, every stroke burning. At last, Lyra's hand gripped his arm and hauled him onto the bank. Harper collapsed beside him, coughing, her hair plastered to her face. The Ashborn screamed across the river, a sound so piercing it made the trees shake. Then, one by one, they dissolved into mist and melted back into the forest. Silence returned, broken only by the rush of the river and their ragged breathing. Lyra knelt beside Eli, studying him with those pale silver eyes. You wielded the key, she said softly. And you survived the Ashborn's gaze. Few have managed either. Perhaps you are more ready than you believe. Eli lay back on the moss, shivering, his chest still tight with fear. He didn't feel ready. He felt like a kid who had almost drowned and barely escaped monsters. But the key pulsed warmly in his pocket, as if whispering otherwise. Beside him, Harper pushed her wet hair out of her eyes and groaned. Just so we're clear, she muttered, next time you drag me into another dimension, I'm packing a life jacket. Eli almost laughed. Almost. Chapter 5. The Warden's Sanctuary. By the time Eli, Harper, and Lyra stumbled away from the riverbank, the sky above the Evershade had shifted. The strange green light dimmed into violet dusk, and long shadows stretched across the forest floor. The moss underfoot glowed brighter, guiding their steps like lanterns. Eli's clothes clung damp to his skin, every breath leaving him chilled, but the Ember Key pulsed with warmth against his chest. It felt alive, like a second heartbeat. They followed Lyra along a narrow trail that wound deeper into the woods. The path grew steeper, climbing between cliffs veined with glowing roots. Water trickled down the stone, catching faint silver light. Where are we even going? Harper asked, hugging her arms against the cold. Please tell me it's not another river. Lyra didn't slow. To the sanctuary. It is hidden, even from the Ashborn. There, you will hear the truth. Eli tried to focus on the forest around them instead of his exhaustion. The Evershade wasn't silent, it thrummed with life. Strange insects buzzed in spirals of light, and somewhere far off, a bird sang notes that echoed like chimes. Every tree seemed to watch them, every shadow to hold its breath. Finally, the trail opened into a clearing surrounded by ancient oaks whose trunks were twisted into arches. At the center stood a stone structure half swallowed by vines and moss. It wasn't a building in the human sense, more like a temple carved directly from the rock, with sweeping pillars that spiraled upward like reaching hands. Light spilled from runes etched deep into the stone, pulsing faintly as if the place itself breathed. The Warden's Sanctuary, Lyra announced. Harper let out a low whistle. Okay, I'll admit it, that's kind of cool. Inside, the air was warmer, fragrant with herbs burning in clay bowls. The floor was laid with stone tiles, worn smooth with age, and shelves carved into the walls held scrolls, jars, and relics that hummed faintly with power. It reminded Eli of Professor Thorne's hidden room in the library, only older, grander, and infinitely stranger. Lyra motioned for them to sit on a woven mat near the center. She leaned her staff against the wall, then knelt gracefully across from them. The flickering firelight from the bowls reflected in her pale eyes. "You have questions," she said simply. "That's an understatement," Harper muttered. She pointed at Eli. "Start with this, Seeker, business." "Why him?" He's Eli." Eli shot her a look. "Thanks." "I'm serious," Harper continued. "He's not exactly the sword-swinging chosen one type. He's quiet. He draws weird monsters in his notebooks. That's it. So why is he suddenly the hero of your prophecy?" Lyra studied Eli, her gaze calm but unyielding. "Because the Seeker is not chosen for strength of arm, but for strength of sight. The Ember Key responds to those who can see what others cannot, those who look at the cracks in the world and imagine what lies beyond them. Power begins not in muscle, but in vision." Eli felt his stomach twist. It sounded flattering, but terrifying too. He wasn't used to being told he mattered. "And the prophecy?" he asked quietly. Lyra's voice lowered, carrying the weight of ritual. "Long ago, when the Ashborn were first banished, the Heartfire was lit at the core of the Evershade. Its flame keeps the shadow at bay, binding the veil that separates your world from ours. But the flame is fading. Only the Seeker, with the Ember Key, can rekindle it. If it dies, the Ashborn will return in full strength and neither world will survive." The words sank into Eli like stones. He imagined the Ashborn spreading through Redwood Falls, slipping down quiet suburban streets, devouring everything in their path. He shivered. Harper leaned forward, her tone skeptical. "So, let me get this straight. Eli has to, what? March into the center of this magical forest and relight some giant cosmic campfire, or the whole universe goes up in smoke." Lyra's expression remained steady. "Yes." "That's insane," Harper said flatly. "He's a kid. We both are. We can't even drive yet." "Prophecy does not wait for convenience," Lyra replied. "The Seeker's path is never easy, but he will not walk it alone." Harper frowned. "Meaning?" Lyra's pale eyes softened as they turned to her. "Meaning you are here for a reason, Harper Vale. The Key chose Eli, but the forest allowed you through as well. The Seeker always has a companion, a balance, a tether to remind him he is still human. Without one, the burden destroys him." Harper froze. "Wait. Companion? Like sidekick?" "Like equal," Lyra corrected. "The Seeker leads with vision. The companion leads with strength. Together, they endure." Eli glanced at Harper. She was staring at the floor, her jaw tight. He knew her well enough to recognize the storm brewing in her head. She didn't like being told what she was supposed to be. Before he could say anything, a low rumble shook the sanctuary walls. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and the runes along the stone flickered. Lyra rose to her feet instantly, eyes narrowing. "They have found us." Eli's chest clenched. "The Ashborn?" Lyra nodded grimly. "Their hunger grows bolder. The sanctuary still holds for now, but it will not last." She turned to Eli. "The path to the Heartfire begins at dawn. Until then, rest. Gather your strength. Tomorrow, your true trial begins." Eli's pulse thundered in his ears. Tomorrow. His whole life, he'd felt invisible. Now he was supposed to save 2 worlds in less than 24 hours. The Ember Key glowed faintly against his chest, as if it already knew the answer he hadn't yet spoken. Chapter 6. The Path of Trials. Eli woke to silence. Not the silence of his small room back in Redwood Falls, muffled by the hum of traffic and the distant bark of dogs. This silence was deeper, like the whole forest was holding its breath. The sanctuary was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the runes along the stone walls. Harper was still asleep beside him, curled in her jacket, her brow furrowed even in rest. Lyra stood at the entrance, silhouetted against the violet dawn seeping through the arches. She looked like a statue, motionless, yet somehow aware of everything around her. Eli sat up, his body still sore from the river and the chase. The Ember Key pressed warm against his chest. He touched it instinctively, and it pulsed like a heartbeat. "You feel it, don't you?" Lyra's voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall. Eli nodded. "Like it's awake." "It is. The key senses the fading of the Heartfire. That is why it called to you." Before Eli could reply, Harper stirred and groaned. "Please tell me last night wasn't real." She rubbed her eyes, blinking at the runes. "Nope. Still stuck in a magical death forest." "Great." Lyra turned toward them, staff in hand. "It is time." They left the sanctuary together, stepping into the cool morning. Mist coiled low over the ground, and the air smelled sharp and clean. The trail ahead wound upward, where cliffs loomed like teeth against the sky. "The Heartfire lies at the forest's core," Lyra explained as they walked. "But the path is sealed by 3 trials. They test not the strength of your body, but of your spirit. Only the Seeker and his companion can endure them." Harper muttered under her breath, "Lucky us." The first trial came sooner than Eli expected. The trail ended at a clearing where the trees bent away from a pool of perfectly still water. The surface shone like glass, reflecting not the forest above, but a sky filled with stars. Eli stepped closer. His reflection rippled and changed. Instead of his own face, he saw himself older, stronger, confident, standing with the key blazing in his hand. Behind him, shadow burned away like smoke. He stumbled back. What is this?" Lyra's tone was solemn. "The pool of sight. It shows not what is, but what could be. The Seeker must confront his truest fear, not failure, but potential." Eli's throat tightened. He didn't fear being weak, he feared being strong enough, and what that responsibility meant. Beside him, Harper gasped. She'd seen something too. Eli glanced, but she turned her face away quickly. "What did you see?" he asked. "Nothing," she said too fast. Her fists clenched. The pool shimmered, and the water hardened into a sheet of crystal. The path across revealed itself, a bridge of stars stretching to the other side. Lyra gestured. "The first trial is past." They crossed carefully. The bridge pulsed under their steps, like walking on living light. Beyond, the forest darkened. The second trial awaited in a cavern where the trees' roots tangled so thickly they formed walls. The air grew heavy, almost hard to breathe. In the dim glow, shapes began to crawl from the shadows, figures made of smoke and ash. Their eyes burned red, their voices whispers in Eli's head. "You are nothing," they hissed. "Invisible. Weak. Forgotten." Eli's legs locked. They were his thoughts, his worst doubts, given form. The shadows turned toward Harper, their whispers sharper. "Second best. Overshadowed. Never chosen." Harper's face twisted, her teeth clenched. "Shut up," she spat, swinging her fist through one of the shapes. It broke apart in smoke, but 3 more took its place. Eli felt his chest cave in. The whispers wrapped around him, smothering. Then he felt the key burn hot against his skin. He clutched it, and light burst outward, scattering the shadows. Harper stared, breathing hard. Eli's hand shook, but the whispers had vanished. Lyra's voice was steady. "The second trial, the trial of shadows, tests whether you can face the lies you tell yourselves. You prevailed." Eli looked at Harper. They weren't lies, though, not really. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Doesn't matter. We beat them." But Eli saw the doubt still clinging to her like smoke. They pressed on. The forest grew stranger, trees bending in spirals, the ground tilting as if the world itself warped. Finally, they reached a cliffside where a narrow bridge of roots stretched across a gorge so deep it seemed bottomless. The wind howled, carrying faint whispers. "This is the third trial," Lyra said. "The crossing. It is not strength or vision it tests, but trust." Harper eyed the bridge. "Of course it is." The roots creaked under their weight as they stepped on. Eli felt the gorge pulling at him, shadows swirling below. Halfway across, the bridge shuddered violently, and one of the roots snapped. Harper slipped, catching the edge. "Eli," she shouted, her legs dangling over the abyss. He dropped to his knees, grabbing her wrist. The gorge yawned beneath her, the wind roaring louder. "I can't hold," she started. "Yes, you can," Eli shouted back, his grip tightening. For once, there was no doubt in his voice. "I'm not letting go." Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, all the sarcasm and defiance was gone. There was only trust. With a heave, Eli pulled her up. They collapsed together on the bridge, gasping. The gorge quieted. The wind died. When they rose, the bridge was whole again, stretching easily to the far side. Lyra inclined her head. The third trial is past. The bond between seeker and companion is forged. Eli looked at Harper, still catching her breath. She gave a small, crooked smile. "Guess we're stuck with each other now." The key burned hot against his chest. Ahead, the path wound upward toward the heart of the forest, where a faint glow pulsed in the distance like a waiting flame. The Heartfire. Chapter 7. The Ashbourne's Touch. The forest grew quieter the higher they climbed. Gone was the chorus of strange insects, the rustle of unseen creatures. Even the wind seemed to retreat, as though the ever-shade itself held back from what lay ahead. Only the faint glow in the distance, steady, pulsing like a heart, gave the forest a center, a destination. "The Heartfire," Lyra murmured, her pale eyes locked on the light. "It calls. We are close." Eli's chest tightened. The Ember Key against his skin blazed warmer with every step, like it knew its source was near. He tried to steady his breathing, but each inhale felt sharp, carrying a taste of ash. "Anyone else smell that?" Harper asked, wrinkling her nose. "Yes," Lyra said grimly. "We are no longer alone." The trail narrowed into a passage between towering blackened trunks, their bark split as if scorched by ancient flames. Shadows clung to the cracks, seeping like smoke. Eli slowed. What happened to these trees?" Lyra touched one gently, her fingers tracing the charred grooves. "The Ashbourne leave scars. Where they pass, life sickens." As if summoned by her words, a low hiss slithered through the air. Then another. The ground trembled faintly beneath Eli's boots. Shapes emerged from the dark. Not smoke this time, not whispers. Flesh, or something like it. Figures tall and gaunt, their bodies made of cracked obsidian threaded with glowing veins of fire. Their faces were masks of jagged stone, their eyes pits of molten red. The Ashbourne. Eli's throat locked. His legs wanted to run, but the bridge trial had burned that fear into something else. He stood rooted, gripping the key in his fist. One of the creatures stepped forward. Its voice was both hiss and growl, scraping against Eli's ears. "Seeker." The words sent a chill through him. They knew who he was. Lyra raised her staff, its crystal tip blazing. "Stay behind me." The Ashbourne laughed, a terrible sound, like stone grinding on stone. "You cannot protect them, Warden. The key will open the way, and the Heartfire will die." The ground split. Flames licked up through the cracks, forming a circle around the clearing. The Ashbourne advanced, their steps heavy, deliberate. Harper grabbed Eli's arm. Do you have, a plan? Because I don't." "I know," Eli stammered. "But the key, maybe it can." Before he could finish, one of the Ashbourne lunged. Lyra swung her staff, releasing a shockwave of light that shattered its chest to fragments of glowing stone. But the pieces twitched, writhing, pulling back together. "They cannot be destroyed," Lyra snapped. "Only held at bay. Run." The command jolted Eli into motion. He and Harper sprinted down the trail as Lyra held the Ashbourne back with bursts of searing light. But even as they fled, Eli heard her voice, urgent and fierce. "Do not stop. Reach the Heartfire." The forest around them warped. Roots clawed upward, Branches knotted into cages, as though the Ashbourne bent the land itself. Harper ducked under a collapsing arch of vines, dragging Eli with her. "Keep going," she shouted. They burst into a hollow where the faint glow of the Heartfire bled through the trees, brighter now, almost within reach. But before they could cross, a figure stepped into their path. This one was different. Taller, its form sharper, more defined. Its eyes burned with intelligence, not just hunger. The others had been monsters. This was something else. It smiled, though its mouth was a jagged crack of molten stone. "Seeker," it rasped. "You carry the Ember Key. Give it to me, and I will spare your companion." Eli froze. The key burned hot in his palm, and his mind spun. He couldn't fight this thing. Lyra wasn't here to protect them. If he refused, Harper shoved him hard, knocking him sideways. "Don't you dare even think about it," she snapped, glaring at the creature. "We didn't crawl through death pools and shadow caves for you to just hand over the magic rock." The Ashbourne's grin widened. "Brave. Foolish." It raised a hand, fire gathering in its palm like a sun about to collapse. Eli's instincts roared. Without thinking, he thrust the Ember Key forward. Light exploded from it, searing white and gold. The blast struck the Ashbourne full in the chest, hurling it backward with a shriek that rattled the trees. The light lingered in the air, burning away the smoke and fire. For a moment, the path was clear. The glow of the Heartfire surged brighter as though answering the key's call. Harper blinked, wide-eyed. "Okay," she breathed. That was new. Eli stared at the key, his hand still trembling. I didn't even know I could do that." From behind them, the forest roared with the sound of pursuit, the other Ashbourne closing in. Harper grabbed his hand. "Then you better figure out what else it can do. Fast." They ran toward the glow, the sound of fire and stone crashing behind them, the Ember Key blazing the way forward. Chapter 8. The Heartfire. The forest thinned as they ran, the air thick with heat and smoke. Roots twisted beneath their feet, but the glow ahead grew stronger, no longer a faint pulse, but a steady blaze. The Ember Key throbbed against Eli's chest, each beat urging him forward. Then, suddenly, the trees broke. They stumbled into a vast clearing, and Eli froze. At the center rose a spire of stone, jagged and black, but from within it burned a fire unlike any he had ever seen. It wasn't flame in the normal sense. It was alive. Gold and crimson light curled upward like living ribbons, bending and weaving into patterns that shifted with every blink. Sparks floated on the air like tiny suns, rising and fading before they touched the ground. The Heartfire. Even Harper stopped in awe, her usual sarcasm swallowed by the sight. "Okay," she whispered. "That's actually incredible." Eli's chest felt tight. The fire didn't just glow, it sang. Not with sound, but with something deeper. He could feel it in his bones, like a chord struck inside him. But as he stared, the awe curdled. For all its brilliance, the Heartfire flickered. Shadows gnawed at its edges, dimming the light. Every few moments, the blaze faltered, leaving cracks of darkness that pulsed outward like ripples. "It's dying," Eli murmured. Lyra emerged from the trees behind them, her robe scorched, her staff dim. She looked exhausted, but her eyes held fierce relief. "You have reached it. The trials have prepared you, Seeker. Now you see the truth." Eli turned to her, his voice unsteady. "How do I fix it?" "The Ember Key," Lyra said, pointing to the glowing chain at his chest. "It was forged from the first spark of the Heartfire. Only it can rekindle the flame. But it is not simple. To awaken the Heartfire fully, you must give it more than light. You must give it yourself." Eli blinked. "What does that mean?" Lyra's gaze was steady. "The Heartfire feeds on truth. On what lies deepest within. To relight it, you must face what you fear most, and offer it willingly. If you hold back, the flame will consume you instead." Harper stepped forward, shaking her head. "Wait. So you're saying he has to, what?" "Throw himself into a magic bonfire and hope it doesn't fry him alive." Lyra's silence was answer enough. Eli's stomach lurched. He stared at the key, its glow fierce and steady. All his life, he'd felt invisible. Now he was supposed to step into the center of the most powerful force in this world, risk everything, and somehow keep it alive. Harper grabbed his arm. "Don't do it. We'll find another way." "There is no other way," Lyra said quietly. "If the Heartfire dies, both worlds fall. The Ashborn already gather at its edges." As if to punctuate her words, the ground trembled. Cracks split the clearing and smoke seeped upward. Distant shrieks echoed, growing louder. Harper's grip tightened on Eli's arm. "This is insane. You're just a kid. You can't." "I have to," Eli said, surprising himself. His voice shook, but the words felt truer than anything he'd ever spoken. "If I don't, then what was all of this for?" Harper's eyes searched his, desperate, angry, afraid. But beneath all that, there was something else, trust. She let go. "Then I'm going with you." Eli blinked. "What?" "You heard Lyra," Harper said, lifting her chin. "Companion. Equal. Whatever happens, we do it together." For the first time since they'd entered the forest, Eli felt steady. Not because the fear was gone, it wasn't, but because Harper was right there beside him. Lyra raised her staff, its crystal faintly glowing. "Then together you will stand before the Heartfire. The choice will be yours, Seeker. But remember, fire reveals truth. It cannot be deceived." Eli and Harper stepped forward. The heat of the Heartfire washed over them, searing but not burning. Sparks swirled, clinging to their clothes, their skin. The key in Eli's hand blazed so bright he could barely see. Behind them, the forest roared as the Ashborn drew closer. Ahead, the Heartfire pulsed, waiting. And Eli knew, the moment of truth was coming. Chapter 9, Trial by Flame. The air around the Heartfire shimmered, bending light into waves. Eli and Harper stepped closer, and the heat pressed against their skin, not painful, but heavy, like a hand on their shoulders. Sparks drifted around them, clinging, sinking into their clothes and hair until they glowed faintly in the dark. Lyra raised her staff. "When you step into the Heartfire, it will see you. It will strip away all pretense, all masks. What remains is truth. Only by offering it freely will the flame awaken. Only then will it drive the Ashborn back." Eli swallowed hard. He could already feel it tugging at him, pulling at his chest like a tide. Harper's hand brushed his, quick, nervous. "You ready?" she asked. "No," he admitted. "But I'm going anyway." Together, they stepped into the blaze. The world vanished. Eli stood alone in a vast space of shifting light and shadow. The Heartfire roared around him, but it wasn't fire anymore. It was memory, thought, dream. Every spark carried a fragment of his life, his sketchbook pages fluttering in the wind, classrooms where no one noticed him, dinners eaten in silence. Then the sparks coalesced into a figure. It was him. Not the boy he was now, but the version he had seen in the pool of sight, taller, confident, eyes steady, the Ember Key blazing in his hand. The seeker he was supposed to be. "You are nothing without me," the figure said. Its voice was Eli's, but deeper, stronger. "You hide in corners, afraid to be seen. How can you carry the fate of two worlds?" Eli's chest tightened. This was his greatest fear, being asked to lead when he'd spent his whole life shrinking away. He shook his head. "I'm not you." The figure smirked. "Not yet." The flame shifted again, showing Harper. She stood across the chamber of fire, facing her own trial. Eli couldn't hear what she saw, but he watched her eyes widen, her mouth twist with fury and grief. She was shouting at something or someone he couldn't see. He wanted to reach her, but the Heartfire held him fast. His trial wasn't hers. Eli's double-stepped closer. "You think bravery is holding a key? You think destiny will transform you? No. Power demands sacrifice. If you step back now, the flame will gutter out, and no one will ever remember you." Eli's throat burned. Part of him wanted to collapse, to give in, to admit it was right. But another part, stronger, surged forward. "I don't want to be remembered," he said, his voice cracking but fierce. "I just don't want to watch everything die. That's enough." The figure faltered, its smirk flickering. The Ember Key in Eli's hand blazed brighter. The Heartfire responded. The false seeker screamed as its body split into sparks, dissolving into the flame. Eli gasped, falling to his knees. The key pulsed steady, alive. Across the chamber, Harper staggered forward, her eyes wet, her fists clenched. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since they'd left home, the walls she carried around herself were gone. "You okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. "No," Eli admitted again. And then, with a weak laugh, "But maybe that's the point." The Heartfire surged, flames spiraling upward. The light enveloped them both, sinking into the Ember Key, into their skin, their very bones. Then, with a sound like a breath drawn after too long underwater, the Heartfire blazed to life. The shadows recoiled, the clearing flooding with golden light. Outside, the Ashborn screamed. Chapter 10: The Siege of Ashen Hollow. The ground shook before the scream reached them. A sound like iron tearing, mixed with the cry of something ancient and furious. Eli and Harper staggered, clutching their ears as the trees at the edge of the clearing bent like reeds in a gale. From the shadows beyond the Heartfire's light, the Ashborn came. They poured forth like smoke given shape, their bodies rippling with black fire. Some walked upright, their eyes glowing embers. Others crawled on twisted limbs, their claws leaving trails of ash in the soil. The air itself seemed to choke on them, thick with soot and sulfur. Lyra's voice cut through the roar. "Protect the Heartfire. If it falls, all hope dies." The Ember folk rallied. Spears of crystal lit with flame, bows strung with strings of light. They rushed to form a circle around the fire, their voices rising in a battle chant that made the very air vibrate. Eli felt the Ember Key pulse in his hand, warm, steady, as though guiding him. He lifted it, and the Heartfire answered. A thin arc of flame leapt from the key's tip, cutting the darkness like a whip. The nearest Ashborn shrieked, dissolving into sparks. Harper grinned, breathless. "Guess you finally figured out how to use that thing." Eli tried to smile back, but another wave of Ashborn surged forward. The humor died instantly. The battle erupted. The Emberfolk loosed arrows that streaked like falling stars, each one striking true. The Ashborn shrieked and scattered, only to reform and rush again. Lyra's staff slammed into the earth, sending shockwaves of flame across the ground, scattering enemies like leaves in a storm. Harper ducked and spun with startling grace, a short ember blade in each hand, blades Lyra had thrust into her grasp without warning. She moved like someone who had always known how to fight, though her breath hitched with every strike. "Eli," she shouted, her voice raw. "Don't think, just burn." He raised the key again. Heat surged up his arm, threatening to overwhelm him. But he leaned into it, not away. Flames burst outward, a shield of fire surrounding them both. The Ashborn that touched it dissolved instantly, their screams vanishing into smoke. For a moment, they held the line. But the ground trembled again. From the tree-lean emerged a figure larger than the rest, its body armored in plates of obsidian, molten veins pulsing beneath. Its eyes were like twin furnaces, blazing hatred. In its hand it carried a weapon, a jagged blade forged of shadow. Lyra froze, her face draining of color. "A warden of ash." The words carried weight. Even the Emberfolk faltered. The warden raised its weapon and swung. A single arc of black flame ripped through the clearing, scattering warriors, tearing up earth and stone alike. The Heartfire flickered, its blaze bending against the force. Eli stumbled, the Ember Key vibrating painfully in his grip. The warden's gaze locked onto him, as though it knew. As though it had been sent for him. "Eli." Harper grabbed his arm. "We have to move." But Eli couldn't. His feet were rooted to the ground, every nerve screaming. The warden strode closer, each step shaking the earth. Then the Ember Key pulsed again, harder this time, almost desperate. The flames whispered in his mind, "Stand. Burn. Remember." He lifted it, his arm trembling. Fire erupted, brighter than before, forcing the warden to halt. For the first time, the monstrous figure hesitated. And in that pause, Eli felt something shift. Not power. Not control. Belief. Not just in the key, but in himself. "Harper," he said, his voice steady for the first time, "stay close." She smirked through the blood on her cheek. Wasn't planning on going anywhere. The Heartfire flared, answering them both. Together, they stepped forward. The battle for Ashen Hollow had truly begun. Chapter 11. The Warden's Shadow. The clearing shook as the warden advanced, each step scattering sparks from the Heartfire's edge. Its shadow spread unnaturally wide, swallowing the Emberfolk's flames as though they were nothing but candlelight. Eli's grip tightened on the Ember Key. His arm shook, but the flame in his chest, newborn and fragile, refused to flicker out. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Harper. Her laugh was ragged but fierce. "Not a chance." The Emberfolk rallied, unleashing their fire spears, their starlit arrows. The sky blazed with streaks of light, but every shot shattered harmlessly against the warden's obsidian armor. With a roar, the monster swung its jagged blade, scattering warriors like leaves in a storm. Lyra met the strike head-on, her staff blazing like a column of sunlight. The clash shook the earth, sparks flying in every direction. But the warden's strength was overwhelming. Lyra staggered, blood on her lips, and the circle around the Heartfire faltered. "Protect the flame," she shouted, though her voice wavered. The Ashborn surged into the gap, crawling, slashing, smothering the Emberfolk's fire with black smoke. Eli's heart pounded. "We can't hold them. Not like this." Then the Ember Key pulsed so strong it almost burned his hand. Images flooded his mind, the seeker in the pool of sight, fire leaping like wings, the Heartfire not as a weapon, but as something alive, something shared. He understood. "Harper," he cried. "Take my hand." She didn't hesitate. Their fingers locked, the Ember Key blazing between them. Heat roared outward, not wild, but steady, like a heartbeat-made flame. The Heartfire flared in response, its blaze surging taller, brighter, pushing back the Ashborn like a tide. The warden snarled, raising its blade to strike them down. But Eli didn't wait this time. He lifted the key, and the fire answered not just him, but Harper too. Their flames merged, spiraling into a single torrent of golden light. They struck. The blast slammed into the warden, forcing it back a step, but no more. Its obsidian armor cracked, molten veins spilling out, but the monster roared and drove forward, swinging its blade in a devastating arc. Eli barely raised the key in time. The clash sent him sprawling, the heat ripping the air from his lungs. Harper screamed his name, darting in front of him, ember blades flashing. She caught the next strike on crossed blades, her arms trembling, her knees buckling under the force. "Go," she shouted at him. "End it." Eli staggered to his feet. His vision swam, the world tilting, but the key pulsed steady in his hand. He saw Lyra still fighting, her staff shattered to half its length. Emberfolk fell all around him, their light winking out. If he failed, everything would burn. He looked at Harper, holding the warden back with nothing but grit and fury. Her eyes locked on his, trust burning there, fierce and unyielding. Eli raised the key one last time. He poured everything into it, his fear, his doubt, his longing to matter. He didn't try to be the seeker he had seen in the pool. He was just Eli, the boy who drew in margins, who never thought he'd be chosen, who didn't want to lose the one person who had stood beside him through the fire. The Heartfire responded. It surged through him, brighter than sunlight, hotter than any flame. His body became conduit, not master, and the blaze erupted outward in a column that pierced the sky. The warden turned to strike, but it was too late. The golden fire engulfed it, tearing through obsidian, melting shadow. It roared, a sound that shook the clearing, then split apart into 1,000 sparks that scattered into the night. The Ashborn shrieked, their forms unraveling like smoke in the wind. One by one, they vanished into ash and silence. When it was over, the clearing was still. The Emberfolk collapsed to their knees. Lyra leaned on her broken staff, her face ashen, but her eyes alight. The Heartfire burned steady, taller than ever, its glow painting the night gold. Eli stood swaying, the key warm in his hand, Harper at his side. Both were covered in ash, blood, and soot, but alive. For the first time, the silence wasn't filled with dread. It was filled with breath, with hope. Chapter 12, Embers of Dawn. The first light of morning bled across Ashen Hollow. The forest, once cloaked in soot and shadow, now glowed faintly gold. The Heartfire burned steady at the clearing's center, its flame softer now, more like a hearth than a storm. Its light stretched through the trees, pushing the last tendrils of smoke away. Eli sat in the ash, his body heavy, every muscle trembling from exhaustion. The Ember Key rested across his knees, warm but no longer searing. Its glow matched the sunrise, as though it too was exhaling after the night's fury. Harper dropped beside him, her hair tangled, her face streaked with soot. She nudged him with her shoulder. "Still breathing?" "Barely," he muttered, though a smile tugged at his lips. "Good." She leaned back on her elbows, staring at the Heartfire. "Because if you weren't, I'd have to tell everyone how you fainted halfway through the fight." He huffed a laugh, though his throat was raw. "I didn't faint. I strategically collapsed." She grinned. For the first time since they'd stepped into this world, the weight behind her eyes had lifted. Around them, the Emberfolk moved quietly, tending to their wounded, gathering the fallen. The air hummed with grief and relief in equal measure. Lyra approached slowly, her staff now just a carved branch, splintered but still carried with pride. She looked at Eli with something deeper than gratitude. Reverence, maybe. "You did what none of us could. The Warden of Ash is gone. The Heartfire breathes again because of you." Eli swallowed, heat rising in his face. I just didn't want to watch it die." "That," Lyra said softly, "is what makes you Seeker." Harper shot him a sidelong glance, her smirk softened into something almost proud. The Heartfire flared, brighter for a moment, as though listening. Sparks rose into the sky and drifted outward, carried on unseen currents. Lyra lifted her gaze to them. "It spreads now," she whispered. "Its light will reach the corners of our world once more. The Ashborn will retreat weakened." For now, Harper asked. Lyra's expression darkened. The Warden was but one shadow. Others remain. And beyond them, she hesitated, then shook her head. "Darkness never dies. It only waits. But you have given us time. You have given us hope." Eli looked at the Ember Key, its glow steady in his hand. A weight settled in his chest, not dread this time, but responsibility. He had stepped into the fire and not burned. He wasn't the boy hiding in corners anymore. As dawn spread fully over Ashen Hollow, the Emberfolk began to sing low, mournful at first, then rising into something fierce and bright. Their voices filled the clearing, blending with the crackle of the Heartfire. Harper stood, stretching. She held out her hand to Eli. "Come on. Let's not make them think their savior's too weak to stand." He rolled his eyes, but took her hand anyway. Her grip was steady, grounding. They stood together, facing the fire. The war wasn't over. The darkness would return. But when it did, they wouldn't face it alone. For now, though, they had this moment. The Ember of Dawn.